Economic Growth, Lecture 5, Part 4. We're going to look at two things in this talk, headwinds and then problems with economic growth and how we should approach it. The headwinds comes from a lecture from Professor Robert Gordon of Northwestern, and I will give you a YouTube link of his TED Talk. It's a 12-minute talk where he explains himself in his book, The Rise and Fall of American Growth. And he makes the argument that economic growth in the U.S. is just a one-time event. It happened with the great inventions, almost all of them happening in the 19th century. It took some time to refine these and exploit these inventions, and it really had its biggest impact on the U.S. economy between 1920 and 1970. That's where we saw all the big gains and all the big changes in productivity as we figured out how to use all these great inventions like the airplane and the automobile and the basic parts of the computer and everything else, automation, industrialization, and the big change in productivity really came during that period. And now his argument is that anything, that, well, including this, the washing machine, which I have another lecture posted by Hans Rowling, which will be part of this too, to take a look at. But now, since that time, all of our innovations and our inventions, our apps, our iPhones, our social media have all been more distractions than great changes in productivity. And so you have to ask yourself, is he right? I mean, I've lived through the computer revolution, and I've lived now through the social media and apps revolution, and I know that prior to having my own laptop and having my own iPhone and all that, when I focused, I was way more productive. And nowadays, you get access to all information that before I had to go to the library and really try to track it down. And I can find it at my fingertips now, which is great, which means I can really get information quickly. But everything's at my fingertips now, which means I can be distracted on Facebook, or I can go off on Instagram, or I can do whatever and not be focusing in on what I'm trying to produce. All right, so the four headwinds that he talks about are demographic shifts, and the first one being reduced hours worked per capita. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, if we work less hours, we produce less. Well, there's always the argument you should work smart, not harder. And working smart means you have more output. So you can work less hours if you work smart. That's another issue. He argues that the retirement of the baby boom generation, who were primed to spend a lot of hours at work because of the Great Depression, and that's just the way it was. And the question is there an exit from your generation from the labor force and prime age adults to do other things? That may or may not be a super big headwind, because I mean, everybody, it's hard to say that your generation's any different than mine in terms of how many hours you work and how hard you work. Education attainment. Over the last century, the big push has been to get people access to high school and college education. The wage gap between someone without a high school education and someone who's a college graduate now is almost tenfold. It's huge. The difference is a spike between where you are. So getting your college education, again, getting a college education is not so much to get an education, it's to learn how to learn, so that when you go out on the job, you don't, nobody's going to pay you to solve easy problems. You have to solve hard problems, and nobody's going to pay you if the boss has to solve the problems for you. So it's really all about learning how to learn And in the US, relative to the rest of the world, especially Southeast Asia, the question is whether or not we're slacking on our education and we're not running you guys through enough math, enough English, enough science, etc. And we're losing our rank. I know one of my co-authors is from South Korea, and his education in high school was phenomenal relative to mine. We're about the same age. And he basically spent 4 hours a day sleeping and the rest studying. And when we work together, it's obvious his skills in terms of math and in terms of even some parts of English were way better than mine. And, you know, he was trained to be a top-notch student. And again, where my competitive advantage was in thinking outside the box and being creative, and we worked together as a excuse me, as a good team. I think I might cough a few times during this because the smoke is pretty bad out here, and so but onward. Increases in inequality. If we have a winner-take-all society in which the rich get richer and the top 1% keep getting richer and the bottom 99% don't, because their income is growing incredibly slowly, the question is, do we have enough incentive to work hard? And you can make two arguments, one for and one against. You could say, well, yeah, winner take all. I'm going to really work hard and I'm going to win that lottery ticket that's just slightly out of reach for everybody else, but I'm going to win it. And I'm going to become a millionaire or a billionaire. And that's one way to motivate people. The other view is you're going to say, well, I'm never going to be that person who's going to have that breakthrough idea, and I'm never going to get paid anything, so why do I bother to work so hard? We're going to come back again to the inequality issue in the next lecture. Debt. This is a big one. Question is, how far should the government or any firm or yourself go into debt in order to invest in the future? So most of you probably are not a lot in debt, but you might be some in terms of investing in a car or investing, taking a loan out for school. Once you decide to take a loan out to buy a house, or you take a loan out to put your kids through college, etc., you start accumulating debt. And, roughly they say, debt for getting a loan on a car should be no more than 1 year of your salary. A house should be no more than 3 years of salary. Those are old rules of thumb, but you get an idea that there's some rules of thumb of how far you want to go into debt. Well, the government, the U.S. government or any government, doesn't really have a rule of thumb. I mean, we can print money anytime we want, and the question is, does it matter? If we owe all this money to ourselves, or we owe this money to people who buy our debt, which would be our bonds, say China or Europe, does that matter? Because the United States is infinitely long. It's not like us where at some point, we're going to die and we should pay our debt off before we die. Ideally, doesn't always happen, but when you're talking about a state government or a local government or a federal government, it never dies technically. So passing the debt along to future generations as a way to invest in future generations, how big a deal is it? The real question is whether or not wanting to pay this debt down is going to lead to an increase in tax rates in order to do it, or a slowdown in transfer payments, which in this case would be Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security at some point. So economists go back and forth, but most economists think that the debt needs to be addressed. Now remember, the debt is the stock, the deficit is the yearly flow. And so with this COVID-19, we've run up a big deficit this year in 2020, which means our debt is also much bigger. But now I would strongly suggest you go watch this Robert Gordon TED Talk that I have posted below the link to this lecture in the email. All right, the downsides of growth: environmental harm, unequal distribution of wealth. It creates needs not really needed. In other words, the consumer culture, conspicuous consumption, bandwagon effects. You need to have X, Y, and Z because all your friends do. That's one issue. Urban congestion, increased crime, right? And the focus of modern capitalist systems that worry about the size of the economic pie more than we worry about how we share the pie. That's a typo. How we share the pie with all of humanity, right? And that's a big difference between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans want low tax rates. What I earn, I want to keep. Democrats like low tax rates too, but at the same time, they're like, well, we need to extend our hand to the neighbors who either have had some misfortune and we need to support them. And it's a push and pull between the two, even though, everybody's trying to do the right thing. There's different views on what is the right thing. One of the ideas is green growth or sustainable development. And here we're talking about growing economic, I got to stop here for a minute.